Hi, I'm Sarah Soliz, Director of SAR Press here at the School for Advanced Research, and I want to welcome all of you to SAR Press Editors Conversations, a new virtual series in which I invite editors and authors who are producing innovative new work at other presses to come and share their work with our alumni audience, as well as anyone else interested in writing and publishing. Joining me today are Morgan Tunzelmann and Davis McKenzie. Morgan is the Market and Business Development Manager for RavenSpace, a division of the University of British Columbia Press, and a publishing platform for media-rich, interactive books created in collaboration with Indigenous communities and scholars. Davis is a professional communicator and co-author of As I Remember It, the first publication by RavenSpace, and a unique collaboration between Tla'amin elder and knowledge keeper Elsie Paul, her descendants, and a scholar. And this project shows the potential of digital publishing forums to circulate Indigenous knowledges across networks and generations. Before we jump into the conversation, I'm going to ask my guests to briefly introduce themselves and their work. Morgan?
Thank you, Sarah, and thanks for inviting us, and thank you as well to Davis for coming on to attend and share his perspective as the author. So I'm going to share a little bit about RavenSpace, but before I do, I just want to note, so RavenSpace was born from the University of British Columbia in Vancouver, Canada, which is on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Musqueam people. And I'm going to now share my screen, and I've got a very, very short presentation on just a little bit about RavenSpace to give you some background here. Great. So what RavenSpace is, it's the short version, it's a publishing platform designed to support community-based and led scholarship in Indigenous studies. And we publish online multimedia works. As I mentioned, we're part of the University of British Columbia, or UBC Press, a publisher with decades of experience publishing impactful peer-reviewed books by Indigenous authors on Indigenous-related topics. And the quote that we have on the slide is, we're dedicated to a model of publishing that embraces collaboration, respects Indigenous protocols, and uses digital tools in imaginative ways to make knowledge accessible and shareable across communities and generations. So what we formed to do was really to respond to a bit of a mismatch between the way in which Indigenous communities and researchers work together. And typically they now form long-term relationships that are based on respect, in which they work together to determine how research will serve the communities as much as it will serve the academy. And then as well, we wanted to find ways to basically draw out the expertise or enable the expertise of Indigenous knowledge keepers to be shown in ways that reflect how those teachings are held and how they are shared. So to do this, we sought input from our authors and then from a number of founding partners, some of which I'll be mentioning as we go through. So there's the University of Washington Press, which is a founding partner on a second publication, a number of libraries and museums, and some other technology groups as well. And then, so the publication features and processes, what we decided to do with RavenSpace was experiment with formats that go beyond the traditional print form. So even when you think about an ebook, you're still basically dealing with the print form because you have the text that is displayed in a way that mimics the book. But we wanted to find a way to allow for multiple forms of expression, such as storytelling, dance, animations, maps of traditional territory, timelines, that kind of thing. So the publications, they have multimedia elements and multi-path navigation, in which authors can basically design different paths through the work. So if you're a researcher, you might take a different path through the pathway through the publication, or if you were an educator, you might also use a different path. And then we also put in an Indigenous language keyboard, which features syllabics that allow for most words to be transcribed. And then one of the most significant thing we did was we made sure that the platform included links to archives, such as the Reciprocal Research Network. The Reciprocal Research Network includes records of Northwest Coast Indigenous art from museum collections all across the world. And it allows its users to build its own projects and create discussions and add information to the source records. And then we also integrated another tool called traditional knowledge labels into the platform. And I think I'm just going to skip ahead. This is an example of what a traditional knowledge label looks like within As I Remember It. And so what the labels do is authors can use them. They're built into the platform and they can customize them for their own purposes. So they may be used to ask the user to attribute the work to its rightful source. They may be used when sharing culturally sensitive media elements or pages or other parts of the work. This one is on outreach, so it's sharing the idea that this part of the work is meant to be shared, but that the authors request that it be attributed properly. So for us at RavenSpace, tools like these and links to the archives, they really helped us open up discussion between ourselves, our authors and partners in terms of how to customize these and also how to think about other tools that might be helpful for community-based and community-led publishing. But what features and tools, bells and whistles are ultimately meant to do is to support a co-creative, collaborative process that is really what's at the heart of RavenSpace. So we wanted to come to an authoring and publishing process that involves kind of walking alongside each other and learning from each other, in which RavenSpace editors will work with authoring groups who can be academics or community members or both, and liaise with media creators, video producers, and animators who themselves then consult with the authors on how they can best produce and integrate media elements for a more in-depth experience. And then the other thing I'll mention about RavenSpace Works is that they go through 2 peer review processes. One is scholarly with academics with a university affiliation. And then the other is community-based. So the authors will choose a panel of knowledge holders or community members who have the authority and expertise to comment on a publication. And in this way, we're able to respect the multiple sources and places that expertise lies. So what we have here in the photo is a photo of one of the community-based review processes that, as I remember it, went through, and this is with the Tla'amin Nation and Powell River District educators. Yeah, and then, so the first publication that we released was in 2019, and that is, As I Remember It, Teachings or Umstyle from the Life of a Tla'amin Elder, with Davis's Chichi, or grandmother, Elsie Paul, and also with Paige Rabeman and Harmony Johnson. Elsie Paul is an elder of the Tla'amin people and a mother tongue speaker of the Tla'amin language. She is the recipient of the Canadian Historical Association's Lifetime Achievement Award. And she received an honorary doctorate degree from Vancouver Island University in 2010 in recognition of a lifetime of effort dedicated to supporting First Nations well-being through her work as a social worker and pillar of her community. And this, the book is both a life story and a community history. So it reflects Tla'amin history through stories that Elsie Paul recalls, as well as older stories and knowledge that's held, that she's passing on. So I think I will turn this off and turn it over to Davis so he can share a little bit about his own process as well.
Thank you so much, Morgan, and thank you to the press for inviting us to chat today. Ajay Chaput, Davis McKenzie, Tla'amin, Tla'amin Nation. I come from Tishosum, which is a small village we're 100 miles northwest of Vancouver, if you can imagine where that is. That's our territory. And Tishosum means the place where the waters run milky with the herring spawn. And it's a bay, and that's our central village up here. And after spending 15 years in Vancouver, I just moved home on Halloween, so it's really good to be home. Thank you for everyone who's showing up today to hear about our project and our work together. And really, we're here to talk about, the teachings and how do you put the teachings online today when the internet can be such a crazy place? Is it safe? Is it desirable to do so? These are the kinds of questions we asked ourselves when taking what was a print book here about Chichia's life, that's my grandmother, Coxtalis, and turning it into something that would be an online resource. So Morgan covered a lot of the elements around the publication process, and maybe I'll just back up a minute and talk about what the project meant to me, because it came at such a crazy time. And I guess I go back to 2017 when we first started the talks with the press, and I think it was a rainy day in February, and I met Darcy Cullen down at Artigiano in downtown Vancouver, and we were talking about, why don't we take the book and turn it into a website? We've got this funding, let's give it a try. But it's going to be our first project, so we don't know how we're going to do it. We're going to have to figure it out together. And I took that away and I thought, holy smokes. And right at that time, I was over at McMaster University doing my graduate in communication studies. And I was really entrenched doing a bunch of work, content analysis. Opioid overdose had really hit my family hard. I lost a brother and other relatives. And I was really into doing this project, a media analysis around basically race and opioids and, the impacts of how the stories are told in media. But this thing was it was such a downer to me, actually. I was interested in it, but when you follow an interest, but it's maybe not so good for you. And I just was reeling on a personal level from all that grief, and was pursuing this master's thesis that I just canned it. I threw it in the garbage and pivoted and turned to working on this project with UBC Press. And the reason we decided to do that on a personal level, it was just much more generative. And I thought, getting these teachings online, that's the antidote to all this other stuff I'm trying to research over here on this side. Let's put the good stuff, let's put the teachings out there, let's get the true history out there, because so many people who struggle with addiction, it comes from that place where you're struggling with your identity. You're struggling not feeling good enough. You're struggling being told you're lesser than. And these are things Chicha faced in her life, but she had the teachings backing her up. So that was extremely powerful. So I guess the long and the short is that's how I came to partner with the UBC Press on this project, which turned out to be a really good partnership, and one where I think we learned and taught each other a lot along the way. Morgan, I just want to pick up on your point about peer review, because I remember when the press was like, you got to do a peer review. And we were like, well, what's that? And they said, well, we got to get experts to talk about Chicha. I said, well, who could actually talk about Tao, our teachings? Who could school Chicha on that? She's 90 years old. She's a doctor, not only honorary doctor, but within our community, she's just one of the top knowledge keepers. So who can actually assess whether or not what she's saying is the right thing, or how we're doing it is the right thing? So Chicha, instead, for our peer review process, I looked through all the families in our village, and we've got about 1,100 people in our Tla'amin community. We're the northernmost Salish. And she looked across the families, and she identified 7 young people who were carrying the language, carrying the culture, living by example in day-to-day life. These were people who would come sit at her feet and talk to her about the teachings, and they were really showing that yearning to learn. She worked with those young people and said, you're going to be my reviewers. And so we invited them to the table, and we had a workshop with them, and it was phenomenal. The feedback we got from them, because she said, the book is for you, and the book is for you in your efforts within the school system, within justice, within child and family, within all these areas you're working. So it has to work for you. This has to be a good tool for you. If we're going to create this website, it's got to work. So we got their feedback day one. We got a ton of good feedback from them. We integrated that into how we built the site. So step by step is how we did it. That's how we did the work back home in the community. I don't know if that's a proper introduction of what you're looking for, but I wanted to pick up on a few things Morgan was saying and also talk a little bit about the genesis. I can talk about why we did the book too, but maybe we could talk about that later. Yeah, I'll just follow your lead, Sarah.
Thank you so much. Let me just throw in here to anyone who's just joined us. I'm talking with Morgan Tunzelmann and Davis McKenzie about As I Remember It, which is a new digital publication from RavenSpace. They publish media-rich interactive books created in collaboration with Indigenous communities and scholars. And let me remind everyone in the audience to please type any questions into the Q&A so that I can share those as we go. Davis, I wonder if you could just back up even a little bit further and just tell us about the book and what it is, and what it's become, now that it's on the web. And what do you mean by the teachings?
Yeah, so the book is written as I remember it, teachings from the life of a Tla'amin elder. And in our language, when we talk about Tao, that is our teachings. So that's the values, that's the things you do in day-to-day life. It's our whole pretty much unwritten canon of how to live your life. I can't think of really comparisons, like religions have certain texts that they would follow. This is kind of our, in a way, Bible, I guess, but also, yeah, I mean, it includes things like how to deal with grief and loss, how to properly take care of yourself, how to prepare people for transitions in life from being a child to becoming an adult. What are the things you need to do to stay strong? Taking care of one another, the idea of we're always helping people in the community that may be suffering or struggling. What does wealth mean? What makes a wealthy person? And it's not material, you guessed it, right? So, all of those desirable characteristics, that's Tao really in a nutshell. And I know Chicha would explain it in a much different way were she here with us here today. But it's interesting. The goal, really one of the key goals with the book, and when I think about the website / book, it's really intended first and foremost as kind of a love letter to future generations of Tla'amin people. And Chicha was very intentional about, we have families within our community who may not have grandparents. They don't have the privilege of having grandparents who are first language speakers. Residential schools up in our territory here, Catholic run institutions really, really impacted the passing on of our language. We have a lot of frozen tongues here. And so I think she really wanted to put down on paper in a digital format, those teachings, that way of life that her grandparents passed on to her. And, a big part of her story is that she escaped residential schools for the most part. She spent a brief 2 years there, but it didn't impact her in that way because she had that foundation of life with her grandparents. She traveled up and down the coast. She would hide. So they would take her away from the village when the police would come to take the children away to residential school. She would take off up the coast, hide on Harwood Island, Augixon. These are place names in her territory. She would go to all these places and take off and be away. And so I think, she talks about so much of the pain and trauma and different things we deal with in community. So many of us don't even know where that comes from, right? Because those conversations have been very quiet or frozen within our families. And she thought, I just want to take what I know, the beautiful things my grandparents taught me and shared with me, and put that out there for young people to be able to read, review, understand. I think what's been surprising to her has been the interest from non-Indigenous people in the book. So she thought, this is for us. She thought, first and foremost, family project. Second of all, for the broader Tla'amin community. Third of all, for the broader Jutham-speaking people, which include our sister nations of Klahoose, Halmalco, and Comox. Fourth of all, for anyone else, school educators, but that everyone else has become really overwhelming. She's got letters from Tennessee, people writing her letters, old-fashioned, sending them up to her address, and thank you for helping me work through my divorce. Thank you for helping me deal with the loss of my mother. So these teachings, Tao, Tao, it's for everyone. And that's been the surprise, I guess not a big surprise, but, I think a lot of these teachings are really what the world needs right now. And she's very surprised to hear how much other people have benefited from them, I guess.
And, you know, but for both of you, really, what kind of response have you gotten to the web-based book or project specifically?
I've
been talking a lot. Morgan, do you want to jump on?
Sure. I mean, basically, I mean, it's as you said, Davis, like you see that your grandmother's been getting this response from you know, a broad swath of the community. When we look at the official like analytics, we can see that it really does reflect that sort of outward circle that you're talking about. Like the center circle is really around the Tla'amin territory and the surrounding ones, and that is basically the core sort of visitors. And then the response that you get more broadly, we have visitors coming in from India and New York City and a whole bunch. And then I think within our own, as publishers, the response that we've gotten from our colleagues has been very much interest and intrigue in both the production, the sort of logistics behind it, and then as well the ethics and the mission that is behind it, that is really about not only publishing Indigenous voices and voices from the community and helping to support that community knowledge, but to really make sure that the entire process is very like iterative and collaborative throughout, which is something that I think people are increasingly starting to think about in the publishing field, about how to work those different ways of working together in there. Yeah.
Maybe I'll just I'll just add a huge, I guess, part of the creation story of this project was developing the print book. We had almost 22 hours of audio recorded of Chichia that went into the print book. So the entire print book is her voice, all her words. And we thought, what are we going to do with these tapes? These, like, to hear our language spoken, to hear how she delivers a message, it's as much in the words she says as the pauses, as the way she, to hear her speak, you have to go to the site and check it out. But, you know, I have the privilege of her being my granny, but, you know, all I've heard, we've introduced this to other Indigenous folks, our, you know, Quag youth neighbors, other folks up and down the coast. Wow, she reminds me of my auntie. She reminds me, people feel immediate, like just hearing her voice. So we thought, we can't waste this. We got to get it out in the sphere. And so I think that was a huge idea. The other part was in our community, because of fires, floods, lack of access to cameras, we have very few photos in our community in the 30s, 40s, 50s, couple rare ones from the 20s. Chichia's grandparents had a camera. They protected those. We didn't have a fire. You know, they had 50 albums. So a big part of the project was I went through all those albums and re-photographed a bunch of them, those pictures, those family pictures. And we had almost like a coming out where we brought those pictures back into light, into the community. People had an opportunity to see. I remember when we did the peer review, my cousin said, I've never seen the picture of my dad as a baby. We don't have one picture. Now I've seen that. And so again, from a community perspective, that was a big benefit, is getting her voice out there, getting the pictures out there. You can't do that in the book format. So just add those two bits.
Since you touched on this, I wanted to ask Davis, in some of your commentary on the project, you ask, how should we consider and ethically address questions about authorship, protection of knowledge, and communal knowledge, especially in relation to Indigenous knowledge and on the internet? And so how did you try to answer those questions in this work?
Yeah, so I don't think I answered them very well at first. It's funny. So my cousin Harmony was the one who worked with Chichi on the print book. This is all confusing, but we have a lot of relatives. But it was my cousin Harmony who really worked with Dr. Paige Raymond to put together the print book, which is where we got a lot of the material from. When we got to the website and I got to talking with the press, I said, let's get it all out there. And, you know, right away, they're like, whoa, what about IP? And then I talked to my own community. They're like, what about IP? And I said, I have to take my public relations communicator hat off, which is the work I've been doing for 20 years, and rethink this. I learned so much about intellectual property and, you know, just things that I took for granted, but knew, but didn't really put into words about our teachings and how we protect it. So I think, Chicha joined Facebook at 84 years old. She signed up and I got a friend request and I went, what is going on here? And now she's 90, she's a Facebook expert and she's been Zooming through the entire pandemic, teaching language 3 days a week through the pandemic, 90 years old. And so, I think it boils down to the internet is a place where Tla'amin people live now, right? Indigenous people live here. So what are we going to do with it and how are we going to protect it? And so when it came to protection, I went to one of my tougher aunties, Gail, who's really strong in canoe protocol. And I said, what are we going to do? We want to make this site in Tla'amin territory. She said, let's invoke the canoe protocol, our guest host protocol. So folks who do visit the site, you'll notice it's not, we have one of those annoying click away things that people rarely do anymore. We did that for a reason. And that's to protect our knowledge. So we say right on the site, the site is on Tla'amin territory. It operates according to Tla'amin protocol. We have words like the regular rules of the internet do not apply here. We remind you these stories, photos, videos, and language on this site are not content or information. There are belongings, right? And I think it was this academic with the last, I'm so terrible at this, with Christensen, maybe Kim Christensen, who talks about belongings, taking this, really rethinking about this as belongings. And one of the complicated aspects of it is some of this is Chicha's belongings, her personal stories, and then some of it is community belongings. So when we think about our creation story, when we think about our kaich, our mink stories tell us how to live. And mostly they tell us how not to live because mink is a little troublemaker, but those stories belong to the broader community. So we had to have those discussions within our peer review context with Chicha. How much do we share? How do we hold back? How do we protect it? Morgan, you talked about those labels that we put together. We took this idea of intellectual property or traditional knowledge labels, and we put them in our own Tla'amin language. So for certain sensitive information, we put a label on called Amsna, and that means it's ours. It belongs to the whole Tla'amin community. For sensitive information about Chicha's life, Atna, it's mine. That belongs to me. So, that's always a fuzzy line. What's the teachings that are family-based? What's the teachings that belong to the whole community? So we constantly walk that fine line through the publication process. I don't know if that answers your question, but those are some thoughts on it.
Yeah, and just to add to that, we were just talking about the different kind of the circles of the audience and how it is appealing to a broader audience. And part of what you've done there through that process is really created two levels of teachings, one being the teachings themselves, and then one being the teachings about how visitors from outside the community need to approach this work and how they need to think about approaching any kind of cultural sensitive work. So it facilitates that discussion, and it also really, it provides like a useful checkpoint. There's the blurb the quote that we have from you for the book is something like shows the democratizing potential of the internet, which I always thought was really good.
So we have a question on the same subject. I don't know if you can say a little bit more about protecting intellectual work that resides in families and communities, but I think people are interested in hearing more about that subject. I don't know if you can dive a little deeper or give some more examples.
Yeah, it was so interesting. I'm actually going back almost 2 years now to early talk we gave about this at UBC. And I was sitting with a bunch of different academics, smart folks in the room, and they were quite interested in the intellectual property aspect. And there was a group within that group that said, well, what's your takedown policy? How are you going to take down information that, and this other Indigenous academic stood up and said, takedown policy? Why are we talking about takedown policy? We need to be talking about how to get this information out there. Like, this is a critical moment for us as people to be sharing this information. And realistically, like pragmatically, this is where our people are spending a lot of time, and in particular during the pandemic. And so, I give the example of my Chicha teaching over Zoom, teaching language 3 times a week. That was actually not even possible in a pre-pandemic circumstance because she's elderly, she's not getting out in those same ways. So it's opened up this space of possibility. Now we have learners from Vancouver, from different areas that are far away, Texas, joining in, learning Ayajutham, their given tongue, you know. So I think there's this democratizing aspect of it. Of course, we're super concerned about people taking our information, misrepresenting our information, copying and pasting, scraping, all the things. People don't always show up and be their best selves on the internet, but you also can't control things on the internet often. Like, you have to give up this in some ways. Like, if you put it out there, you do have to accept that and ask people to be their best selves, assert your own nation's governance. So we're very clear in our protocol section. This site is in Tla'amin territory. It operates according to Tla'amin law. Therefore, here are the things you need to do to respect our belongings. If people choose not to do that, there's always one. There's always going to be someone who chooses not to respect that. But we honestly felt that the majority of people would see that, understand that. And I think particularly as more societal change is happening, and actually take that to heart. So as hosts of this site, we have a responsibility to tell people how to use its contents and how to not use it. We've spelled that out. And so now as guests, it's their responsibility to reciprocate and conduct themselves while in our territories in respectful ways. So I don't know if that answers your question, but those are, yeah, a few more thoughts on it.
Yeah, and just to speak a bit more on like to RavenSpace, so the site, as I remember it, the publication is completely open. I think, but what we're considering doing is building in the ability to maybe have eventually different modes of access. So it hasn't happened yet, but we're anticipating that maybe in the future there will be somebody who comes to us and says, we want to publish this, but we want to have only a certain portion of it for the community. So we're looking at ways to do that makes sense from the publishing perspective and from the technical perspective. What we do know is that moving forward, that we will always have a core portion of our publications that will be open, but then it's going to be a little bit, there's going to be some variation in there because we always want to be responding to what the author groups are bringing to us and what they want to.
I think also, if I could just talk to intellectual property, one more idea came to mind is that how intentional Chichia was about choosing what she kept in and what she kept out. And, you know, those of us that get that privilege of sitting at the feet of elders, we understand their brilliance as curators of the right story in the right time and the right moment. And, you know, Chichia is very careful about the words she puts out into the universe. And ultimately, these were the ones she decided were okay to put out in public. So I think that's the other level. I hope people can accept this gift, which is this book, is her judgment on what's needed in this moment. So I thought I'd add that.
Thank you. So we have a question about the practical side, a couple questions. One is, does the online work have a stopping point or is it ongoing? And do you see the process of transferring a book from the printed page differently than just creating it online in the first place? So first, is it done? Does it still go on? How are you addressing that question?
This is such a good question, and thank you to whoever asked it, because I'm having some gripes within my family right now because we've got our family tree up, you know, in the book, and we've had a lot of grandchildren, great grandchildren come into the world since then. So where do we start and where do we stop? And this was one of the reasons we actually kept the family tree in the print book only and didn't make it a big focus up on the website, because we just knew we're always going to have it open. So I think in our mind, there did need to be an ending point. Like, we needed to view it as a project practically just to get it done and say there's a beginning and an end, like it's done, right? So I think that one of the things that was really appealing for us as a family to work with UBC Press is we looked at doing our own website, but then there's maintenance, there's technology changes, there's all those things. We wanted to partner with someone big and expert in that so that they could do that maintenance and keep it alive for us as something our family could always have available to us, and that would weather these storms of technology changes and things like that. Sorry, the second part of the question was, oh, the transferring process. Yeah. So this was super interesting. So if you read the book, it's told in a life course format. So it's kind of, you hear about her childhood, married life, and all of that. In my mind, that didn't translate to the way people use the internet and the web. We're much more looking for a bite-sized chunk. So sometimes we don't have the patience. Like, there are long form reads, but you're there for the interactive experience, the multimedia experience. So we didn't put the entire book, and we actually created completely new categories for the information that was in the print book. So the way this process worked is I read the entire book and created 4 categories that you see in the website that I thought were themes that would be helpful for Tla'amin people, but also for outsiders: colonialism, wellness. Like, you can actually dive deep into these. And then we pulled stories from within her life course that and excerpts that fit into those themes, just to make it a little bit easier for our audience or our viewer to take in the information.
Yeah, thank you. One thing I'll just mention about so we do have a couple of publications in development that are, as I remember, it's one of it, and then we have a couple more coming up that are based on printed books. And that's really, it's more because that's what authoring groups tend to want, because there is more, there's more of an expectation for scholars that they do publish their work in the printed format. But I think every time that we do translate it into a RavenSpace book, it really is about that process, Davis, that you were talking about, where you're basically reorganizing it. So even our works that are based on print books, I would still call them born digital, because they really are reformatted into something new that you experience. Yeah, and then another thing we'll mention is that we've been working a little bit to try to find ways to preserve the websites for the long term. So right now we have them up and running and maintained on our servers, but we're also looking for ways to make sure that we don't suffer from link rot and other things like that. So yeah, so we've been working with the NYU library and then a few other publishers, and trying to figure out ways that will support the preservation of the publications, their contents, of course, but then also their structures, the way they're put together. So it's still a work in progress, but we're at least positioned to be able to do that, to participate in it. And I'm just like, everywhere I go, I see so many like brilliant online projects produced by like bigger, communities, and then also within the university, like artworks and films, and it's all like, you're constantly thinking like, oh, I hope there's that they are going to be preserved for the longer term, because there's just so much content that's coming to light and so much knowledge. Yeah.
If we go back to that rainy cafe in 2017, that was our big question for UBC Press. How can we keep this for the long run? Because I agree, I see beautiful works created in digital space that just either disappear or break up, or it's awful. It's a lot of work, and it's a terrible waste, it seems.
It's interesting. We have another question. Lynn says, as a retired publisher with a serious interest in digital publishing, I commend you on this fascinating and creative project. I'm always concerned about how we can sustain new kinds of publication. I note from your website that you've completed one other project. Are you planning others? Are you actively looking to acquire new projects? And how are the projects supported financially? Morgan, do you want to start?
Sorry. So we have a second work that is in development, and it is sorry, let me just, one moment here. I just want to make sure that I get the title right. Yes, so that's the Kanzilel, Making It Right. And it's collaborative reframing of Kwakatu film and audio recordings with Franz Boas, 1930. And so the editors on that are Catherine Bummarcuse, who's with the University of Washington and directs the Burke Museum there. And she's working with a number of, so Franz Boas did a number of audio recordings and video recordings with the Kwakatu. He went up and down the Northwest Coast and recorded them onto these wax cylinder recordings. So part of it is about recontextualizing those recordings themselves. And then the co-editors are descendants of the Kwakatu who are in the videos and in the recordings. And so that's Corrine Child, Caleb Child, and Tommy Child. And they are able to recontextualize and reframe and speak back to the archive, which is something that RavenSpace does really well. So that is in development, soon to enter production. Usually the production phases on these works are a little bit longer. We would say within the next year that will be released. And then we have other works in development that we will be announcing in the coming months as well. So we've had, interest from definitely south of the Canada-US border in the United States, and then as well from different areas across Canada, which is great to see. Yes, we are actively looking to acquire new projects. So if you are looking for information, please do reach out to me or through the RavenSpace site. And how are the projects supported financially? They're supported by a combination of funding from both author sources as well as the RavenSpace sources. As we move forward, we're going to be developing a system of memberships for subscribers and that kind of thing that will also support the initiative that way. So that's a lot of ground to cover, but the answers to all of these is basically yes, we are open and producing new works and basically building ourselves up.
Davis, I don't know if you want to add anything. I want to ask a little more about the peer review process. I'm so interested in that. I loved your story about choosing the young people, instead of other elders to review the project. How do you, and Morgan, how do you sort of deal with that logistically? How do you, are the two, like the academics and the community members, are they talking to each other? How do you sort of evaluate, the information that you're getting?
Yeah, I could probably talk more to the community process. So as we talked about, and as you saw in Morgan's picture, we did a peer review with educators, but also with community folks, young people, folks who share the culture and the teachings within our community. I think one of the interesting things about the process is Chicha really had to give permission to those young people to be critical, because it's really against our way. It would be so rude to be making a comment on how Chicha is doing something, right? So we set up the day in such a way that we all got together in a room. We set the website out for review ahead of time with some questions. Then we got together in the room and we looked at how will this help you in your to learn and reach mastery on the language teachings, etc. And how could you use this to promote the style language teaching to those that you work with, right? So we were focused primarily on questions like that. We had people listen and view the website, go through it in the moment in the workshop and write down their comments. We put all those comments up on the wall. We checked for understanding with the folks. Is this what you said? Did we capture it correctly? And then we offered an opportunity for people to quietly also send commentary directly to the press, should there still be those hangups about Chicha. But so she basically opened the meeting for us and talked about what she intended to do and asked them for their honest and direct feedback on what she was doing. she was very clear, this needs to be useful for future generations. I'm not an expert on the internet. I'm not an expert on these things. I need your help. And positioned it as that ask for help. And we got a ton of, just a ton of good feedback through that process. So maybe that's all I would add about the community review.
So I guess what I can say generally in the process of peer reviews, whether they're on the academic side or the community side, is that they really are, we're careful not to be too prescriptive. And this is another part of that walking with the author. We want to tailor, in a sense, a peer review process, a dual process that serves their needs. And if they are working, if you're an academic, an Indigenous academic, and you're looking for tenure, then you are going to want to make sure you have the peer review process and that it follows that more traditional kind of standard. But so I guess what I'm saying is on both sides that there is very much a process of invention in a way that is still happening, that in itself is meant to both serve the needs of authoring groups and then challenge a little bit what peer review needs to be in the digital context. And it needs to be a bit different. And the way that we're doing structuring peer review kind of moving forward, and I think was similar to the way that, as I remember it was done, was that a slice of the website would be reviewed first by the peer review groups. So that could be more like a section, a smaller section of connected pages or connected elements. They would be looked at, it would be looked at in terms of user experience and then also the content. But then, as you're saying, Davis, in the case of your grandmother's work, that doesn't really make sense. So that's why we need that flexibility, right? So it ends up that there is that academic process in which there is two stages, looking at the slice of the website and looking more finally at the broader project, and then the community review process. And I think I wasn't around for the community review process for, as I remember it, which I've always regretted, but it was quite towards the final stages by the time that it happened. Is that correct, Davis? Yeah.
And so we did also bring together in ceremony all the folks that helped on the site at the end, which was just awesome. And my chicha wanted to host it at her house. So my wife sewed all these beautiful feather carriers, and I walked the territory and collected about 16 eagle feathers, and everyone who had contributed, we gifted them. So we had this wonderful woman from Parks who gave us access to 7,000 aerial photos of the territory. We had, this wonderful gentleman from our community, Phil Russell, who gave us access to these other pictures. So we stood everybody up who had helped in the process to actually do the launch. So I think aside from the peer review process, there's also, I think, launching things in a proper way within a community setting and acknowledging this work has been done. It's ready for you to use and see, and it's been validated by these people. So I think that's the other thing I would think about. I noticed, Rusty, hi Rusty, that you're having problems accessing the site. I don't know, maybe Morgan can jump in. I noticed one of our school districts, because there are what are called SSL issues with the site sometimes. And I understand that the press was working on, it has something to do with where the media databases are and some of the content and how they talk to each other that creates some of these issues. So Rusty, I don't quite know what to say or how to help you to get on the site, because I really hope you can look at it. Morgan, I don't know if you've got anything to add.
Yeah, I wonder if it's possible that the site might be being worked on right now there, but I'll actually just send a quick message to our IT person, and he'll see if he can take a look at that. But do go on. Maybe we can move on to other questions as well.
So Lynn has kind of a follow-up comment. She says, in the early days of experimentation with digital publishing, peer review was always a huge issue. Skeptics would constantly say, but how are we going to peer review a website, et cetera, et cetera? This was often a way of trying to shut down new ways of doing things, but that's another story. I love your solution, tailor the process to the context. And I hope that you would consider writing a piece about this for some appropriate professional publication. Because yeah, I mean, that's, I think from so many different angles, and, you know, especially as a publisher, I mean, that's just such an interesting question, and to hear about your process is fascinating.
Yeah, I just want to thank Lynn for taking the time to write that observation. And Lynn, one more thing that we had done in the peer review process is we use that simple software. It's called Hotjar, and it actually tracks people's journey through a site. So it's a very simple tool that you can use to see how people are using the site, where they're getting hung up, the amount of time they're spending on each page, all of that type of thing. So it's a very simple software that can be utilized. So we informed the participants who did the online review ahead of time, hey, we want to see how easy the site is for you to use. So here's a link, and we're looking at you through this thing called Hotjar. So we explained what it was, and then people took the tour, and we saw, wow, they get it hung up here. This is a dead end. And ultimately that led to us creating more of a circular process. So you can click through any chapter of the site, and as you end any chapter, you're brought to the next one. And there's no end, it's not linear. It just comes back in a full circle, because that's really how the teachings work as well. So just one more thing to add to Lynn's comment there.
Interesting. You've touched on a lot of these things. Design, accessibility, ownership, permanence. I wonder, are there any other challenges you face, things you would do differently next time, or things you might do the same next time? What do you feel like you've learned or would do differently from this project?
Yeah, I think I didn't anticipate working in comms PR. Usually we stand up a website in, like 6 weeks. And it's, that's like, and writing all the content. This obviously was a much different project and many more boxes to tick, which ultimately were protective boxes. I didn't realize that at the time. So I think as a person, I felt a little impatient at times that, and also recognizing if you're doing this off the corner of your desk, and we were fortunate, we had a design team, we had a person doing all the programming on the UBC side. So our input was around look, feel, content, and we had these different check-ins. I think for future projects to the press, we could articulate those more clearly. And this is just like a simple project management approach around, scoping it out properly at the beginning and then understanding when check-ins and sign-offs happen. Probably most of it was my fault. I tend to drag things on when I'm like obsessing over details, but I think there are ways to kind of create better clarity in the relationship between the UBC and the author, or the publisher and the author in these things. And, the division of labor, setting that out at the beginning. We expect you will supply all the photographs. We expect you will give us advice on these things. So creating a checklist from the publisher's perspective and the author, I think that would be a great, and we did it as we went, but I think there's less painful ways to do things sometimes.
Yes, this is definitely the PR comms hat coming on, and definitely like in the past, ever since I joined RavenSpace about 2 years ago now, and ever since I've come on, that's a large part of what we've been doing. We've been both moving forward in the production process, but then also developing that exact documentation. So there's a bit of doubling up in the sense of, okay, we're doing this, and at the same time we're recording what we're doing, because yeah, that's there is a lot of co-creative collaboration in the process, but then there's also that need for those clear instructions. So that's what our production team has been working on, is the internal checklists and the external checklists, and also finding ways to streamline things a bit. We've developed a few different templates of different types of publications. So a simpler one that would be a little bit smaller. We were at first calling them chapbooks, which is really like an homage to print. And I was saying, what is a digital chapbook? But basically, it's exactly as it sounds, like it's meant for something smaller. And then, a more standard book, and then a more complex book, which we would expect to be used for something like language teaching, which would have multiple applications. And then in each case, the need for that really streamlined process is more and more apparent. So definitely thank you for bringing that up.
Well, I want to ask if either of you had anything else you wanted to add. This has been such a great conversation. I really enjoyed listening to everything you've said. Any final thoughts about the project or about RavenSpace?
I guess the only other thing I wanted to mention is we touched on it a little bit, but what we're finding is there's a lot of conversation right now about accessibility and what that means in the digital context. So putting in place accessible principles, you know, it means things like alt text and image descriptions and that kind of thing. But we're trying to think of it a little bit more broadly in the sense of what it means for accessibility to groups who may not have internet access, or may typically just use mobiles, and just engaging with that in the design of the sites as we move forward. So it really is, in a way, we're kind of broadening that, or we're finding that we need to broaden the sense of what accessibility is in that context, and the different ways in which we're serving in different users in that way.
Davis, anything else? Any final thoughts?
Just a thank you for inviting us to come talk about this book. We're so proud of it, and thank you to the people who came and listened and asked your questions. And I really hope you can get on the site and hear Chicha and hear her words and her teachings. And if you're going through a divorce or trying to figure out how to grieve, maybe there's something in it for you as well. So thank you so much to the hosts. I raise my hands and thanks to you.
Thank you. I want to send a huge thank you to everyone who joined us, everyone who donated to support the event, to Morgan and Davis, of course, and to the staff at SAR who made this talk possible. You can find out more information about all of our upcoming events at sarweb.org. Just click on the calendar or join us online. Thank you again. This was so enjoyable, and we will see you next time.
Thank
Bye,
you.
everyone.
Shetham Kunima, Kwisam, thanks.